So at Towson, I always teach my students, they have to really listen to their students. They have to really tap into what the kids are interested in and want to do. And so my story's about that. It's about how I came to that. So I had two main teaching jobs when I was teaching high school. And the second one was in a school called Satellite Academy in New York, which is a second chance school. It's a school for kids who had dropped out or had been pushed out of other schools. So those kids, they could come in any time between age 16 and 21. And they, so my kids were older. My students were, I was probably only, 25, and they were 18, 19, 20 years old. I wasn't much older than them. But their life experience was drastically different than mine. Some of them were raising kids of their own. They had full-time jobs. They had, things that they were taking care of their own families. A lot more responsibility than I had. So why were they going to listen to a word I had to say about history, which is what I was supposed to be teaching them? So I had to really figure out, what it was that was interesting to them. And one thing that in New York had plagued the communities that my students were from for ages and ages were something called the Rockefeller drug laws. And these were laws that required mandatory minimum sentencing for anyone caught with a small amount of drugs on them. And so all my students, so many of my students, I should say, not all, but so many of my students either knew somebody or they themselves or some relative had been caught up in these laws. And so we had found out through some networks of mine that there were some challenges to these laws at the state level. And so we decided at the school it might be an interesting idea to teach the students about social studies through the Rockefeller drug laws. We thought it would be cool if we took them to Albany, which is the state capital of New York, to meet with legislators and to talk to them about their stories and how the Rockefeller drug laws had impacted them and their families, to maybe persuade legislators to vote to end these punitive laws. And so, so that's what we did. We kind of suspended what we were doing in terms of the curriculum, and we taught young people about the legislative process, about lobbying, about what the state legislature looked like. We taught them about the drug laws, what the history of them was, and what the impact was, all the statistics and stuff like that. And we brought 75 students to Albany on a very rainy, cold Saturday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't believe it, actually, that they all showed up, and drove the 3-hour trip to Albany and met with legislators. And young people who struggled to write an essay, who hated math, who didn't come to school on time, were speaking very, very eloquently with state legislators about the impact of these policies on their lives and their families' lives. And not that day, but a few years later, we did have an impact on those laws, and they have since changed quite dramatically. But what they saw that day was not just themselves in Albany talking to these big important people, but they saw all these other people there doing the same thing, and they saw themselves as part of the political process. They got some energy from that, and they came back to school thinking, that they can do stuff, that they can make an impact on the world, that school's not just some BS kind of thing that you do to pass a test and get a diploma and move on, but that you can actually change society and change it for the better and change their own neighborhoods and their own lives. And so many of them I'm still in touch with, and they're all doing all kinds of different things, but they all remember that experience as something being very, very pivotal in their education. And I remember it tremendously because as a teacher, it was a way for me to connect with the students that I was working with. And from there, we were able to do everything else.